In the fading warmth of a Queen's afternoon, Archie Bunker sat in his worn armchair, nursing the illusion that the world around him still obeyed the same rules it once did. Those were the days he sang half-heartedly, the old theme echoing like an anthem to a world that had long vanished. Yet inside his modest living room, America's social conflicts, racial anxieties, and generational fractures gathered like invisible guests, refusing to leave. It began, as it so often did, with Edith's gentle optimism and Archie's stubborn certainty colliding over something as simple as renting a room. The hospital had called, they were sending someone to board upstairs. Edith thought it would help with bills, but Archie balked at the idea of a stranger, especially one who might be, as he put it, not American enough. When Teresa Betancourt appeared at the door with her soft Puerto Rican accent and kind eyes, Archie's world tilted just a little further off its axis. Edith, eternally welcoming, ushered her in. "You were so nice at the hospital," Teresa smiled, recognizing Edith from Archie's stay there. The woman was polite, educated, and looking for a place to stay while studying for her X-ray technician exam. Yet the moment Archie stepped into the room holding a steel-jawed mousetrap in one hand and suspicion in the other, his instinct for prejudice took command. "You're the Puerto Rican girl who told me to shut up," he muttered, stunned. It was as though the walls of his home, so used to his temper, were now hosting an ideological battle between the old America he worshipped and the new one moving in next door, or in this case, upstairs. Archie's rants were comical but cutting. He warned Edith against long-haired types and foreigners, fearing they would disrupt his domestic order. He obsessed over the idea of mice in the kitchen while ignoring the moral rod of his own biases. Yet Teresa, with grace and wit, disarmed him at every turn. Her laughter and warmth unsettled him more than her ethnicity ever could. She called him Poppy, not realizing how that word pierced through his pride. "That ain't a good English word," he complained, his face twisting in confusion and embarrassment. But the more Archie resisted, the more he revealed his contradictions. He craved respect. While denying it to others, he feared outsiders, but desperately needed their attention. Beneath the comedy was a portrait of an American patriarch cracking under the weight of cultural change. Dinner turned into a battlefield of languages and flavors. Teresa cooked pescado, proudly serving it to the family. Archie refused to eat anything that looked back at him, covering the fish's head with a baked potato. The table became a microcosm of America's struggle with difference, the refusal to taste what was unfamiliar, the discomfort of sitting beside it, and the humor that arises when intolerance meets kindness. Yet when Teresa's jealous brother later appeared, Archie's prejudice briefly gave way to something human. Mistaking the man for a violent boyfriend, Archie stepped forward, ready to defend her, only to get punched for his trouble. The moment exposed the irony of his fears in trying to protect himself from imagined dangers. He stumbled into real ones born of misunderstanding. Still, when the truth came out, even Teresa laughed, forgiving his foolishness with a tenderness he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. Beneath the sitcom laughter, the episode whispered a truth: prejudice is not merely hate. Sometimes it is fear wrapped in ignorance, softened only by humility. A few weeks later, another episode brought the Bunkers into a quieter but equally painful storm: the question of legacy. It began with a subway accident involving Mike Stivic, Gloria's husband, who narrowly escaped death when two strangers pulled him off the tracks. The event sparked an uncomfortable conversation: who would raise their baby Joey if something ever happened to them? It was the sort of practical question that cut to the bone of family politics. Gloria, still loyal to her parents but aware of their faults, suggested Edith and Archie. Mike, idealistic and combative, refused. "You want your father to raise Joey? I wouldn't trust that man to raise a window." The line landed like a bullet. Archie's name, for all its bluster and blue-collar dignity, had become shorthand for the very bigotry that Mike feared would infect the next generation. The living room became a courtroom, and Joey's future the evidence. To Gloria, love was enough to forgive her father's flaws. To Mike, morality mattered more than sentiment. They listed names of friends who could serve as guardians, young liberal couples, open-minded, safe. Archie, oblivious, proudly brought Joey a toy machine gun for his birthday, calling it his grandpa's personal gift. The gesture, innocent in his mind, horrified the others. The symbolism was undeniable. Archie's idea of manhood, armed, defensive, nostalgic for war, was being challenged by a world that saw violence differently. When Gloria revealed that she and Mike had chosen their friends Al and Trudy as guardians, instead, Archie's face hardened into wounded pride. "You mean if you die, you want strangers to raise my grandson?" His voice trembled, not with rage, but with the grief of a man realizing he no longer represented safety, not even within his own bloodline. Edith tried to mediate, torn between her husband's pride and her daughter's caution. Her eyes reflected both understanding and exhaustion. She knew Archie's bark hid his insecurities, but she also recognized the pain he caused. The confrontation reached its peak when Archie, humiliated, stormed out declaring that if they weren't fit to raise Joey, then they weren't fit to attend his birthday. The laughter of the sitcom audience faded under the weight of that line. It was no longer just about a toy or a will, but about the moral inheritance of a family. Mike and Gloria, trying to rationalize their decision, convinced themselves it was for the best. But when Gloria revealed that Al Bender, the man they had trusted, had once made a pass at her during a drunken night, Mike's righteousness collapsed into jealousy. Suddenly, the perfect alternative seemed corrupt. "We'll make an anti-dying pact," Gloria joked, turning tragedy into absurdity, echoing the dark humor that defined the show, the idea that love might survive if death simply refused to show up. Later that evening, Edith called Archie from across the street. She had news that softened his scowl. Mike and Gloria had changed their minds. They decided not to name anyone as Joey's guardian. "They think they'll live forever," Edith said with a bittersweet laugh. Archie's anger cracked into a grin. For all his flaws, he loved his family fiercely, and the idea that they might someday trust him again filled him with quiet pride. Yet his final gesture, a plan to buy Joey another toy gun as a celebration, proved how little he understood that the world had already moved on without him. Days later, another ghost from the past came knocking. Edith, shopping at Ferguson's Market, bumped into a man she hadn't seen in years, Bummy Finsell, a boyhood friend of Archie's. His arrival seemed harmless enough, a nostalgic reunion of old neighbors. But nostalgia in Archie's world always carried the risk of exposing inconvenient truths. When Edith announced that Bummy was coming to dinner with his wife, Archie's reaction was strangely nervous. "Who'd he marry?" he asked, half dreading the answer. "Dolores Mancini," Edith replied. The name hit him like an old bruise. Dolores, it turned out, had been Archie's teenage flame. The girl from the park, the one memory he had buried under layers of bravado and beer. As the dinner approached, Archie's panic grew. He confessed to Mike in an unguarded moment that he and Dolores had once done something back in high school, something in the dugout at Hanley Park. The confession was part boast, part fear. He didn't want Edith to know. "It was her that reduced me," he insisted, twisting logic to preserve his masculine pride. Mike, disgusted, accused him of hypocrisy. "That's the double standard," he said. But Archie defended himself with prehistoric reasoning about chromosomes and male instincts. The scene was comic but tragic too. A man so trapped in his own definitions of manhood that he couldn't recognize his emotional nakedness. When Dolores arrived elegant and confident, Archie melted into a caricature of his younger self. He tried to act casual, but his guilt was transparent. Edith, oblivious at first, welcomed her warmly. Over dishes of chicken and awkward laughter, the truth slowly resurfaced. In the kitchen, while washing dishes, Dolores let slip the memory of that night, the picnic, the fudge cycle, the dugout. Edith, ever polite, listened with a quiet smile. Only later did she piece it together. "Oh, Archie," she said softly, confronting him not with anger, but with understanding. "I know all about it." The confrontation that followed was one of the most tenderly written in the series. Archie, fumbling for words, tried to justify himself with pseudoscience and guilt. But Edith's forgiveness disarmed him. "Whatever you did before we were married is your business," she said gently. "Just like what I did before we were married is mine." The irony hung in the air like a benediction. Archie for once was speechless. The woman he had underestimated all his life had outgrown him long ago. After the awkward night with Dolores faded into memory life in the Bunker household, returned to its usual rhythm of noise, misunderstanding, and self-righteous conversation. But Queens had a way of throwing new absurdities into Archie's path. And this time, they came in the shape of a contest, a beautiful baby competition, sponsored by the Flushing Tribune. What began as a harmless argument at Kelsey's bar over whose grandchild was cuter quickly spiraled into a full-blown suburban war. Archie's drinking buddy, Barney Hefner, bragged about his granddaughter, Linda, showing a photo of the naked toddler to a room full of men. Archie, defensive and proud, retaliated with Joey's picture, claiming his grandson had the face of a future senator. The friendly banter curdled into rivalry, and in true Archie fashion, he decided that the only way to prove Joey's superiority was to enter him into the contest, whether his parents liked it or not. Edith, as usual, was caught between the men's childishness and her own quiet conscience. She warned him that Mike and Gloria wouldn't approve, but Archie dismissed her concerns. Parents today don't know nothing about parenting. He grumbled, convinced that his instincts, no matter how outdated, were still law. He sneaked into the living room, gathered Joey's photos, and filled out the contest forms, muttering patriotic justifications about competition being as American as apple pie and the Marines. When Mike and Gloria discovered what he had done, the explosion was immediate. Gloria called it exploitation. Mike called it vanity. "You can't turn our son into a prize rooster at a county fair," he shouted. Archie, feeling cornered, struck back with his favorite weapon, sarcasm. "You don't want to win, fine. You raise him to be a loser like yourself." The line hit harder than he expected. Behind the laughter of the studio audience, there was something raw, a working-class father measuring his worth through his grandson, and a younger man who saw that obsession as both tragic and absurd. Still, Archie persisted. When Mike confiscated the photos, Archie secretly kept a copy tucked under a newspaper, convinced he was doing what's best for the kid. His logic was a mix of pride and insecurity. In his mind, Joey's beauty was a reflection of his own legacy, proof that something good could come from a life that had otherwise passed him by. Edith watched helplessly as he cut out extra voting slips from the newspapers, forging signatures from dead neighbors and long-forgotten acquaintances. "That's cheating," she said gently. Archie brushed it off. "Cheating's only cheating when you lose." Her disappointment was quiet but profound. She had long accepted that Archie's moral compass pointed mostly toward convenience, but she still hoped he might one day surprise her. Meanwhile, Barney was running the same game on his end, forging votes for little Linda. Their friendly bet, $10 and a lifetime of bragging rights, became a small-scale parody of American politics itself. Corruption disguised as competition pride, masquerading as patriotism. When Archie's fraud was discovered, Mike erupted again, accusing him of teaching Joey all the wrong lessons. But Edith, ever the peacemaker, saw something else. "Archie just wants to feel proud of his family," she said softly, as if explaining the weather to a child. Her empathy didn't excuse him, but it illuminated what the show had always been about: the fragile humanity inside a man who refused to admit vulnerability. The results of the contest arrived in the morning paper, and against all odds, Joey had made the finals. Edith beamed with joy, cutting out the article to send to relatives. Archie strutted like a conquering hero, puffing his chest and planning to frame the clipping. Yet beneath the victory was a layer of hollowness. His win had come through manipulation and stubbornness, not through honesty or grace. And when Mike refused to celebrate, the tension hung like a storm cloud over breakfast. "You can't even be happy for your own son," Archie accused. "I'm happy for him," Mike replied. "I'm just not happy for what he's learning from you." The audience laughed, but the line echoed long after the laugh track faded. The show, in its genius, never offered clean resolutions. Instead, it let the contradictions of family and pride sit uncomfortably in the same room. Each of these episodes, Teresa's arrival, Joey's birthday, Dolores's, Return the Baby contest, was a window into the same house, but a different America. Through Archie's bluster and Edith's patience, the series captured the country's struggle between memory and progress. Archie was not a villain. He was the echo of an entire generation that had once believed decency meant sameness, that good neighbors looked alike and prayed alike. His prejudices were ridiculous, but they were rooted in fear. The fear of losing control, of being left behind in a world that spoke new languages and questioned old hierarchies. Teresa's laughter, Gloria's independence, Mike's education, all of it represented the future closing in around him. Yet for all his resistance, Archie's humanity kept peeking through, making him impossible to hate completely. He could insult a guest 1 minute and defend her the next. He could curse his son-in-law and still babysit his grandson with pride. Edith remained the soul of the story, the quiet, moral counterpoint to Archie's chaos. Her kindness was not naive, it was radical. In a house full of shouting men, she represented the wisdom of listening. When she forgave Archie for his teenage indiscretion with Dolores, it wasn't out of weakness but strength. "What you did before we were married is your business," she said, dismantling decades of male guilt in a single line. The power of her forgiveness was that it required no revenge, no lecture, just the understanding that love, when it's real, is always larger than humiliation. In her world, goodness wasn't loud, but it endured. By the time the season's final laughter faded, the Bunkers had returned to their living room, the same couch, the same argument, the same fragile balance. Archie still believed America needed a man like Herbert Hoover again. Edith still hummed the tune that made him roll his eyes. Mike and Gloria were still plotting their escape from the gravitational pull of that house. Yet within that ordinary repetition lay the show's quiet brilliance. It captured a nation in transition without ever leaving the couch. Through one working-class family, it documented the painful, funny, heartbreaking process of America learning to see itself honestly. When the camera faded to black, the melody of "Those Were the Days" returned nostalgic but ironic. The song, once an anthem of comfort, now sounded like a eulogy for an era that could not survive its own illusions. Archie sang it like a man trying to summon back a world that no longer answered. The irony was that in doing so, he made himself timeless, not because he was right, but because he was real. His fears, his pride, his contradictions, they belonged to millions of people who recognized themselves in his gruffness. Through laughter and discomfort, all in the family forced America to confront the uncomfortable truth that progress doesn't erase the past. It argues with it at the dinner table. And so the episodes closed as they began, with laughter, misunderstanding, and a fragile hope that somehow through argument and affection families could survive their differences. Archie never truly changed, not in the way modern morality demands, but he learned to live with the people who challenged him. Edith, with her quiet dignity, taught him that compassion could exist even in disagreement. Mike and Gloria, torn between love and frustration, represented a generation determined to build a gentler world, even if it meant breaking their parents' hearts to do it. The Bunkers house, with its squeaky chair and chipped dishes, became a stage where the country's conscience rehearsed itself, where laughter was the only way to bear the truth. In the end, Archie remained in his armchair holding Joey's photograph, the faint sound of Glenn Miller's swing echoing through the room. He wasn't thinking about Puerto Ricans or liberals or even politics. For a fleeting moment, he just looked at his grandson's face and smiled. "That's my boy," he said softly, the words carrying more love than he would ever admit. It was the smallest of victories, but in a world like his, it was everything. The curtain fell not with redemption, but with recognition, the realization that even in ignorance, there is room for grace, and that every argument, every laugh, every tender misunderstanding is just another verse in the same old song about who we are and who we're still trying to become.